Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome everyone. Feel free to shift your seat around a little bit if it's helpful to be able to see or to look, I guess, maybe. Welcome everyone who's online and outside. So a few times a year, rather than giving a Dharma talk, I'll make a time for questions. And this is a really important thing on just a practical level. A lot of things happen, since the last time I've done a question and answer or question and response period. There's been the New Year's, I think probably an election, probably some kind of an insurrection, impeachments, ordinations, New Year's, Christmas, all kinds of things have happened in the world and at the temple and in all of our lives. And so on a practical level, it's just a good chance. I give teachings on what I think is important. I meet with people and give teachings privately according to what's on people's minds. But within the assembly, I don't, what are the questions? What are you finding? It's also true that in this tradition, questions are very central to the way that we explore the Dharma. There isn't simply a dogma within Zen Buddhism that says this is how things are and accept that and then incorporate it into your life. It's teachings which are there for the purpose of resonating with your own heart and mind, and then you try to carry those teachings into your life. And as you do that, you have questions. You come up with, what is this? And it's not that we have teachers so the teachers can give you the answers to those questions, but that if we don't ask those questions, we can't really carry out our journey. So first and foremost, we ask those questions to ourselves. We ask those questions of our life. And then as we're working with those questions, it can be very powerful to meet others with that question. And that's one of the jobs of a teacher, is to meet you in your question, which is a little bit different than giving an answer, right? That's why I like to say question and response, not question and answer, but question and response to what the question is. And this is how our tradition has unfolded for 2,500 years, is that continual process of people taking care of their questions, really honoring their questions deeply, and then sharing them with their communities. So, what are your questions?
Hey Joe.
Hi.
As we read the Way of the Bodhisattva, it's really helping solidify questions I've had in the past about, do I help myself first so then I can help others better? Do I just help others better so then I know how to help myself? Or some blend? And I would love your perspective on that.
I endeavor to not make those different things, helping others and helping myself. That when they're a dichotomy, I fall into thinking that helping is sacrificing, like giving up something about my own liberation to help another being's liberation. But in actuality, other beings' liberation is my liberation, and my liberation is their liberation. So I'm trying to look for the place where I don't make the opposition. Now, I'm not saying that's easy, but I'm saying that's where I put my intention. And then it's a real struggle. It's a real struggle to say, how do I use my resources of wealth, resources of time, resources of intention, of cognitive faculty. How do I utilize them to work in a way where others and my liberation are both attended to? We should really suffer in that question. So when you ask those questions, you often ask a question like that publicly, and I always feel, yes, like the question is the right question. How can we sit here this morning in relative ease and comfort, at least materially, and face a world that has a deep, deep river of pain, which is also flowing through this room, through our hearts, through our experiences, through our lives. Like there should be struggle in that. So I'd encourage you in the struggle with it. It's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be a continual upending of our position. Like I think I'm doing it right, or oh yeah, that went really well. Actually, that's good to enjoy the fruit of our work, but to be upended is so important, and that's why the struggle is important. Not just because struggling makes you stronger or something, but because the struggle is upending your perspective again and again and again, coming with a fresh eye, and what is a fresh eye is attention. Actually, we're paying attention. Right, so we don't just have a filter or an idea of how things are and we're charging forward. We have to pay attention to what's there. And if we're not upended, we're not likely to pay attention. We're likely to just see the projection of our own karma. Anyway, that's some musings. I'm sure that's helpful.
Hey, Joe.
Hi.
So, in meeting the moment fully, this has come up in lots of talks of being fully present. So, with the unknown, the seen and the unseen, how do we know if we're stepping into the unknown constantly?
Yeah.
How do we know we're meeting that moment fully in the present? Does that make sense?
Yeah, we don't.
I know. So then what are we to do?
Yeah. So one of the first teachings that my teacher ever gave me, I don't know if that's the right word to say teachings. One of the first things he taught me is he said, hey, so where's the future? Where do you think the future is? And I didn't even know what he was talking about. So I'm like, in the future? I don't know what to say. It's like someone saying, where's the front? And he said, it's behind you. It's behind you. We all think that we're walking forward, but it's actually we're walking backwards. We're stepping back into what can't be seen. And what we see is actually what has already happened. What we see is what has already been formulated. And so we think of ourselves walking forward into time as if we could say, oh, this is going to happen. I'm going to decide this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to work with this object. I'm going to work with that object to make it happen. And he's saying, actually, anytime you're working with those objects, you're actually working with something that's already, it's already coming into your view as you walk backwards. And I was so inspired by that. I just walked around backwards for a while, which I really highly recommend as a practice, to just find a place, you feel secure enough, safe enough. It doesn't have to be totally safe. In fact, if it's totally safe, that's maybe a good place to start, but you might want a little danger at some point. Danger like rocks and stuff, not like traffic. Roads. Yeah, traffics. And as you walk back, the sense of just the entirety of how your experience shifts when you're walking into a place that you can't see, right? And then a very curious thing happens is your awareness goes to your feet in a really strong way, because that's the only information you have about whether the step you're taking is going to be the correct step is the quality of your foot on the ground, right? What's the texture of it? Has it changed? Does it feel solid? Is the back of your heel touch something like maybe a tree that you're going to run into or something like that? So you pay very careful attention there. That's a kind of knowing, but it's not the knowing of an object. It's not the knowing of, oh, I know this is the way things are, or this is the correct thing, or whatever. It's the knowing of really direct and full attention. So it's not that we shouldn't make plans and we shouldn't have some, encounter objects, but but part of what this tradition is trying to teach us is we shouldn't buy into that as being the truth. It just simply is, that is a tool we have, to project out into the future our ideas. But how do we pay attention to what is really directly present? And when we move from that place, something's possible that's not possible when we're dealing with the world as an object to our subject. That something else becomes possible in that encounter. We can feel this, I think another place we can study this really clearly is with other people. Like, let's say you're having some struggle with someone, and so are you trying to figure them out? Are you trying to have an explanation of what's going on in the situation? Well, that might be helpful. It might be illuminating in some ways, but ultimately it just creates more and more separation. What's a place in which you can pay very direct and clear attention? You actually want to know, how does this other person experiencing this? That's not an idea. That takes a different kind of work on our part, to actively listen, to ask questions, to try to understand, right? In the moment, not as our explanation, but as that meeting. When we do that, all kinds of things become possible that aren't possible in the kind of world of trying to settle a dispute, even if it's a very subtle dispute. And you know that. I'm going to tell you.
Hey, Joe.
I
And like what you were just saying, how in the practice do we have patience?
So you oftentimes walk your dog Cherry in the neighborhood. You used to walk him in the neighborhood more.
Could
but,
you repeat what Genki said?
Maybe Genki could repeat it.
Genki, could you repeat
How in the
please?
practice do we have patience?
Could you hear that?
I couldn't hear the first part.
How in practice do we have patience? Okay, yeah. So when you walk your dog around the neighborhood, and Cherry's like the cutest dog in the universe for those of you who have not met Cherry. Young, pit bull, black, just like it's this chunk of muscle and enthusiasm, right? And one thing I notice because I love Cherry, and probably I come with a little too much energy towards Cherry when you're walking her, yeah, and you're very tuned in to her, like, I don't know what you even say, how she is in a moment. And I can tell that by the way that you hold the leash. It's not, you don't do this. You're giving her rein, but you're also not like, oh, wherever. It's like she's on this leash, and you've got it, but you're not just tugging her around, but you're also not just kind of saying, oh, well, whatever. And if it gets real bad, I'll yank on it, right? And you just stay there. Like the way you feel that leash is something about really knowing Cherry. Not as, again, like a description of how she is, but as an experiential moment-to-moment condition of being deeply connected to her. Right? And depending on who comes up, sometimes she vibes off people, right? And I've seen that happen. And then she'll like, and then you have to kind of step in a little bit and mediate the situation more. So I can tell you're feeling for that. So it's so alive. And that could be tiring, but that's patience. Patience isn't just putting up with something we don't like and kind of gritting our teeth and getting through it. That is a kind of patience, but it's kind of a low-level patience. When we start to develop the practice of patience, then it comes to that kind of awareness. And when you're practicing it, then the world is a different way. You you see like, oh, I'm not just being patient with Cherry kind of getting out of hand, because she's not getting out of hand as much, because I'm staying connected with her. I'm staying present. And that presence goes a long way to helping us be more skillful, to act in a more compassionate way, in a wiser way.
It kind of feels, when you say that, I see it, what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It feels kind of opposite in ways too. It feels like when I'm so impatient, like you pointed out that, but it's so true.
Yeah.
Also, while I'm doing that, I feel very, it's the patients are like at my wits. It's with people too, right?
Yeah.
It's like they come and I'm like, oh, and maybe that is when I'm thinking I have no patience. Maybe that they're,
I would
Yeah.
say when we're pretty confident we're being patient, there's a good chance that we're kind of missing something, probably spacing out. We probably just like have disassociated from the think we're being patient with. There's a painting by the great Japanese Zen master Hakuin Zenji, who's a great revivalist of the Rinzai tradition in Japan, and he was also a brush painter. And one of my favorite paintings of his is this. It's a painting of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, who's the Bodhisattva of compassion, and she's kind of up in a heavenly realm, and she's leaned back like this, and her face is just kind of like and she's doing this, and then there's an inscription that says, "If you had to listen to these people all the time, you'd get tired out too." Something to that effect. I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but because her name means the hearer of the sounds of the world, or the perceiver of the sounds of the world, and of course, it's funny. Many of his paintings are funny like that, but it teaches us something really important, which is a patience. We endeavor not to find patience in the marks of patience. So this is Prajnaparamita teaching. We don't try to find patience within something that looks like patience, because when we do that, we get sidetracked from the actuality of patience. And so Prajnaparamita teachings are always telling us, don't get lost in the marks, don't get lost in the attributes or the signs or the shape of what we think it is. We have to, that might be our gateway. Our gateway might be like, okay, just keep your cool. But then as we go in that gateway, we're looking for something that isn't caught by those attributes, and that helps us go deeper and deeper. So yeah, I think actually when you're a little bit like at your wit's end with your lovely friend, that might be the place where the practice is really happening. Whereas when everything's kind of chill, you don't really have to. You know.
yeah, thank you.
Could you speak to the relationship or the nature of suffering and compassion? Are they separate? Do they arise together, or are they a response?
Suffering and compassion.
Could you repeat the question, Aja?
Yeah. So suffering and compassion, do they arise together, or what's their relationship? Is that a good way to put it? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know, or I'm not so interested in a kind of metaphysical perspective, like do they come together or not, and like as things out there, because those are things that are moving through us. They're not objects of our perception. They are deep movements of life that then we see as instances of things. We see an instance of suffering. We could say, I know that this person is suffering because this kind of thing's happening in their life or has happened in their life, and so I can call that suffering. But really, the suffering is a deep, deep well of which I see an instance of. And compassion's the same way. Compassion, we may say, that was a very compassionate action, or a person's really practicing compassion or deep listening of someone or responding to the needs of somebody who's in pain. And it seems like a thing, but actually it's a deep river. And the compassion and the suffering are really they're of the same deep river. And when I know that deep current in my own being, then I can know that current in other beings, not by prying them open to try to find something inside, but just by sharing the quality of our being together. And so in that way, I think, if we pull back from that, we could say, in a way, they're almost the same thing. But our access to them is not always from the same direction. Maybe our karma brings us to a place of our own deep suffering, but that will also be the source of our own deep compassion. And I think especially that's one of the things that is really, it's very difficult for us to have a deep compassion for ourselves and to not try to dominate our suffering. Actually, I think this is one of our big points of creating more and more suffering, is we try to dominate suffering. We try to, we think, I'm going to practice Buddhism now. I'm going to get rid of that suffering, or I'll do the good stuff. I'll do the right thing. I'll think healthy. I'll have good this. I'll meditate. I'll eat healthy. I'll ride my bike. Whatever it is, and then I'm going to get over suffering. But this is just a domination thinking, which leads to more and more suffering of different varieties. So it's better for us to think of the teachings and practices that they will lead us deeply into our own suffering, not just that they will teach us how to dominate suffering, because that's where the compassion is, which transforms.
Question? Hi, it's Moxie. I wanted to ask you about what you think is going on when people experience concentration and openness and kindness and patience, because I feel like sometimes in myself, I feel like those are kind of modes that aren't always compatible with each other. Maybe because my perspective is limited, so I come in a situation and I feel focused, but then when I'm being asked to be open and really look and take in what's going on, it's very different than that kind of feeling of focus. And a lot of my patients that I work with they're trying to overcome addiction, and so they get very focused on their goal, but then when they make a mistake or what they think is a mistake, they often become quite harsh with themselves. And so I see that sometimes that focus becomes their own enemy. So I wondered, how do you work with that tension? Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's so alive in Buddhist practice, where we're endeavoring to walk the Bodhisattva path. We're endeavoring to walk the really authentic life of a genuine human being, we could say, and to have a lot of passion for that. If we don't have a lot of passion for that, we won't be able to do it, right? So with a lot of passion, a lot of focus, a lot of conviction, that's really, really important. But that same, I'm just kind of repeating what you're saying, but in a kind of Buddhist context or a Buddhist practice context, we'll take that same conviction, and then it becomes really strong judgment on others and ourselves, and then there's a really dark side to it. Then part of the medicine is right there within the conviction itself. When the conviction becomes static, then it just becomes like a measuring stick of some kind. And that what we're really shooting for in Buddhist practice is not that we've just adopted this new measuring stick, but that we're looking for the truth in life. And so our conviction is about that truth, which is something which is continually unfolding, that we continually question, that we continually try to pursue. that kind of openness is not relativity. It's not like, oh, anything could be, I'm kind of hanging it out. It's actually the conviction to say, where is liberation? And I know a whole bunch of things that aren't liberating. And in the case of addiction, for example, when we realize that an addiction is really binding us in suffering, how do we renew that conviction again and again and not have it just be a measuring stick? Right? That to me is the really difficult but necessary thing. That what is the joy of a life that is not caught in that addiction, and how do I become more and more committed to that life that isn't in those cycles of conviction, of addiction? So that's where our focus comes from, not just like this kind of static thing. But that static thing may really be the invitation, and we probably have to go through that process of having a lot of conviction, a lot of focus, and then being too hard on ourselves in judgmental way, and then say, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. We're probably going to do a lot of this. That's called practice. You got a right foot and a left foot, and you got to use them both, and you're kind of controlled falling the whole time while you're moving along. So I don't think we should begrudge that, but especially in your position as a physician, in helping them, how do you help them hold the whole thing? I think is really the point. And just the fact you asked the question means you're super aware of that.
Well, it sounds, thank you for the input. I think it sounds to me like when people start making statements about where they're at and describing that things are like this and I failed and I feel terrible, maybe the answer is just to turn it into a question. It sounds like that kind of airs it out, maybe.
Yeah, a question and maybe an opportunity to say, oh, of course we try really hard, and then sometimes we're over here. Well, what do I really care about? Just because we messed up, like for example, if we're struggling with alcohol addiction, I have some people close to me who struggle with that, and then they fall off the wagon. Is that what we say? Mm-hmm. And then and then they're feeling miserable, really down on themselves. So the question is, well, why were you on the wagon? Like what mattered about that? And how is that still present in your life? It's not like that all goes away. It's still there. That stream is still there. So how do we come to it again?
Adrian, question?
Hi.
Hi. So, when you and I have talked, you've spoken about the strictness of the practice of the Bodhisattva vow. And, mainly in that practice, I see how I do not maintain it. And is that really where the practice is? I mean, I'm not saying that I don't always feel like I maintain it, but so many of the times I just feel like I'm falling down and getting up and falling down and getting up over and over.
Yeah. I know I quote this all the time, but it's perhaps my favorite quote of all the ancestors. Nagarjuna said, "The ground on which you fall down is the ground on which you stand up." If we think of the vow as just being standing up, then that's one way to think about it. And we fail often, right? And we stand back up. But there's another shift that we can make, which is that the vow is the ground. The vow of the Bodhisattva is the ground, and I will fall down on it and I will stand up on it. And both of them are equally important for my learning. They're equally important for the guidance of my path. Now that's not an excuse for messing up, or forgetting, or stumbling, or not enacting the Bodhisattva vow, but it's a kind of way of thinking about it to help encourage us to come back to the ground of the vow, Because the vow isn't just a promise. It's not just like a really, really big promise that I make to do things in a certain way. The vow is a deep meeting or invitation of our fundamental being, which is not separate from any beings. We had some visitors. Is that helpful at all, Karina?
It is. I mean, just understanding, hearing what you said about that deep meeting. That's something for me to practice with, and also really seeing it as the ground itself.
We often judge, like we say, oh, I stumbled, I'm seeing how I don't carry out the bodhisattva vow. And it becomes a kind of, am I doing it or am I not doing it? Evaluation. That's very important. We should have that level of evaluation. But what I'm inviting you to here, or encouraging, is to feel down what is even the place in which that evaluation could pivot from one place to the next. It's not just about helping some other person who's out there. The bodhisattva vow, we're also helping the being that is right here. And both of those things happen together. And that's what we're striving to understand more deeply. But it's completely ungraspable. You can't know it in the sense that we know many things. But when you enact it, you know the enacting of it, which is different than knowing it as an object.
If we're all subject to the causes and conditions of our lives, where does free will meet the Buddha way, and how do we play with that?
So the Buddha Shakyamuni, when he would teach on this, he will always teach about karma. And so there are causes and conditions which are the causes and conditions that are not karmically, they're not through processes of karma. So for example, genetics traditionally is not seen as karmic. It's seen as a process of cause and effect, which happens through the passing of DNA. He didn't say DNA, but the passing of DNA through generations. So that would be an example of something which is not, it's a cause and effect process which is not karmic. It doesn't mean that we couldn't work with it, we couldn't try to make things better, but it's always going to be just a kind of manipulation of cause and effect, those cause and effect relationships. When he came to karma, he said that that's one of the cause and effect relationships. Karma is important because karma is around intention. And it's not just that the cause and effect relationship within karma is that whatever the sum of causes is will necessarily create this effect, but that these causes end up in effect that we're experiencing right now. What we experience now is the effect of previous karma. But as that happens, intention is what allows for the next thing to happen. It's not just a cascading of mental phenomena, but the intention itself is the locus of free will. That is the place where our own choosing molds the stream of karma. Now, But he didn't say, you can just decide for it to be a different way and make it that way. You actually have to work with the karma. You have to work with that cause and effect relationship. Like you're in a stream and you're going down the stream, you could maybe get a little more to the right, a little more to the left. If you get in a really rough part of the stream where it kind of narrows down and the water's going really, really fast, maybe you can't go right and left very much. Maybe all you can do is put your feet in front of you and try to bounce off the rocks if you come against one. But other times the river gets broader and it's calmer and you can do more navigation. So it's like that. Your intention doesn't mean you get to just decide how it is, but it means that you are a player within that stream of cause and effect. And that is the place that we have the possibility for liberation from living in inevitable cycles of suffering. That would be the core teaching. So I find that very hopeful. And in my experience, the cause and effect is not just bound in linear time. We have such a linear way of thinking about, like, there's the past and the present and the future, and it always goes in this direction. My experience has been that it's more cyclical. It's like what exists in one moment of karmic binding or unbinding exists on all these different levels. So we don't have to think about it just in terms of like going down a road or going down a river. When we unlock something in one moment, we find that past and future and present unlock all together. And there's something very strange about that, because normally we're just thinking of time in one way. But it seems to not be the case, that time functions like that. We're addicted to interacting with time in that way, but it doesn't seem to be that's actually an absolute kind of thing. Anyway, those are just some kind of reflections.
I guess I'm curious what a mistake is. How can you evaluate if you've made a mistake when you are going down that stream? It's like, well, if I lean just slightly here, would I not hit that rock? Or, you know what I mean?
Right. What's your process of learning about reflecting and seeing what's a skillful thing to do? Yeah, I think there are times where it's very, very difficult to do that because things are coming so quickly, and the intensity of it means that it's very hard for us to evaluate what is skillful or not skillful. But that's also why in working with the karma, when we pay more and deeper attention, we can we can take advantages of times where that attention becomes fuller, and we can have more insight into our actions and what effects they bring about karmically, so that when we get to the point where we can't do that, our choices are easier because we've made some reflection there. I think in an ultimate sense, it's very hard to say what a mistake is. It's really hard to say. And perhaps a real mistake is the thing that is never considered. You know, we never really reflect on it. But the things that we come to reflect on, even if it was our own misstep, this becomes a teacher for us. You know, and in that sense, it could still be a mistake, but it's not just bad. It also feeds us. So we have to really take care of those. Again, it's agonizing because an excuse won't do. You know, like, we can't just have a good explanation for how we screwed up and then it's going to be all right. We actually have to, feel the pain of it. Like we hit the rock and it's going to hurt. That's necessary for us. Yeah. I guess it's the ups and downs of the nervous system. Yeah. Probably have time for just one more if anyone's sitting on something.
Joe,
Hi.
I have a question about the walking backwards, and it has to do with, and maybe this is part of the human condition. I feel like we have more than one set of feet, and how to bring them to one set. Because as a single mom, right, I'm walking backwards into parenting with one child and parenting with another child and trying to work in all of these different directions. And I have we have all of these hats that we wear, and I feel like all of these people walking backwards at once, but they're not always holding hands, and maybe they're going in different directions. And how do I jump from one person to another and not fall down?
Yeah, yeah. This is the work of making making them all the same direction, or making them all the same feet. I mean, that's what you're asking about. How do I have less feet? But it's vow. It's what Karuna was asking about. How do I make my work of, if I speak for myself, how do I make the work of being a father, being a teacher, a priest, a good neighbor, a husband, a son, brother, a friend? How do I make those all about the same thing? That is not an easy thing to resolve or to know, but they don't have to work at cross purposes. They demand different things from us. They demand things that are different in terms of the types of attention they may be asking for, but they can all be centered in the same vow. This is how the vow has a way of unifying our life, because we can get really clear about it. So I'll give you an example. When I was a school teacher for many years, and one of the things that would happen is I really wanted to be a priest full time, and so I would say, like, I'm teaching. I don't want to teach school. I want to be a priest full time. And then I could really focus on what my work as a priest is. But I needed the money. I needed to support my family, right? So I would feel like pulled, like I'm being pulled over here. This is being demanded of me as a school teacher. But this is the thing I want to do over here, and I'd feel really split. But if I looked into it a little more deeply, I would say, well, okay, being a school teacher, if I'm doing that because I need the money to take care of my family, how is that my bodhisattva vow? How is doing that really aligned with my deep intention? And then there was no question. I was like, of course, I'll work all day, every day. Break me in half. That's what it means. The vow I made to my wife and to my children. That's so clear to me, and so right. I know the rightness of it. And so that's not different at all than being a priest, which is exactly the same, has exactly the same vow to support. And then the two, they could come together in some way. Another possibility, which I did a lot of, is I would try to talk myself into how my work at the school is basically the work of a priest. It's the same thing, and so I should feel good about it. And that didn't work so well. I had to find what was underneath. I couldn't kind of like squish the two together and try to, make them fit. I needed to find how they were already, there was already a thread that was connected. Well, then over time, actually, I did find how my work as a school teacher was exactly the same, whether I needed the money or not. But there was this other route that I could go on. It doesn't mean that there would never be conflict between them. I think actually, if we're really cooperating, if different parts of our being, different sets of feet are really cooperating with each other, they will do this. They will have, it's like if you have a really good friend, like your pretty good friends, you don't fight with. Your really good friends, you can fight with them, right? And you have to. Like, that's kind of what it means, but to be good friends. So that that struggle there is not a bad thing. It's just that really when they're going in different directions, then we feel torn apart, and it's hard to feel like we're getting anywhere.
Can you talk about the temporal part of that too? Because I just feel like I'm pressed up against the limits of being one person. And I sit down in Zazen, and it's one thing and one thing and one thing. But in my life, I need to be in more than one place at a time and doing more than one thing at a time. And I know that I know from Zazen that doesn't work, and I can't do it. And I'm just pressed up against that reality constantly.
Yeah. I would say the main thing is that there's no kind of like consciousness trick to relieve that burden. There's not, you're not gonna like practice your way into, oh, okay, now I can be all those places, right? And seeing that, and then there's a very difficult medicine to swallow, and that is the cultivation of conditions. And this goes back a little bit to what Nathaniel was asking about, that you've been doing this, and you have to continue doing it, which is to cultivate the conditions in which those same demands are not present in the way that they're present now. And that takes it takes time, it takes investment of energy, and it takes a lot of courage, which you have. And you can see in your own life how over just a few year period how things can shift really huge. But in the moment of doing it, it can feel like nothing's changing, right? It just feels like I've been trying to lose some weight, It's so ridiculous. I think I'm being successful, but on any given day, I don't feel like I'm being successful. I just feel hungry. But then there's this thing that changes, right? And so I'm kind of making, joke about it in my own case about something that's very simple and, it's not so hard. But that is like a cultivation of circumstance, right? And so over time, then we find ourselves in a very different place. And there's horrible injustice, and the way the world is put together is really not fair. And I would never say to you, too bad. It's horrible. And your cultivation of the conditions, you have the power to unify. And you're doing that.